So next up, podcast listeners, in the Wall Street Journal, there's this really, really good opinion piece from James Freeman, and it's titled, Bill Gates Isn't Spending Enough. Now, this is a pretty remarkable article, and I do have to give kudos to the Wall Street Journal because it's one of the few papers left that actually has investigative journalists, people that prior to writing do a great deal of homework rather than just writing what they believe or writing an opinion. They actually do homework. And this is important. And while this is, of course, in an opinion piece, there's a great deal of data and information in this piece that backs up what Freeman is saying. It's important, too, because it goes to all of the climate folks that are out there that want to go all in on, the climate alarmists. This article really exposes, I think, the raw nature of what Bill Gates is about and his goal of pushing more and more and more climate control. I like that, climate control, because that's really what it is. You control the climate in your house. Well, they want to just control the climate of society. Bill Gates in particular. So this is worth it. This is worth the listen. In August, green technology investor Bill Gates explained how he helped persuade senators to force U.S. taxpayers to fund massive subsidies for green technologies. Now, Mr. Gates suggests he's not done demanding sacrifices from Americans, even while acknowledging that the world's major emitters of carbon dioxide would likely not be making such sacrifices. The latest message from Mr. Gates is especially disturbing because last month he seemed to have turned a corner and appeared to be trying to help passionate global warmists accept reality. Catherine Clifford of CNBC reported in September that Mr. Gates did not agree with those who call for reduced consumption, a degrowth, if you will, of industrial society. I don't think it's realistic, quote, to say that people are utterly going to change their lifestyle because of concerns about climate, Gates said to Akshat Rathi in an episode of Bloomberg podcast, which published on Thursday. The interview was recorded in August before Inflation Reduction Act was passed. Anyone who says that we will tell you, quote, people to stop eating meat or stop wanting to have a nice house, and we'll just basically change human desires, I think that's too difficult, Gates said. You can make a case for it, but I don't think it's realistic for that to play an absolute central role. Good call, cautioning against an engineered change in human nature. Regimes that have tried such engineering created much of the misery of the last century, Mrs. Clifford added. Even if those countries and individuals who have enough abundance in their life are able to cut back, they won't be enough reduction of greenhouse gas emissions to sufficiently rein in climate change, Gates said. One can debate how exactly the climate is likely to change in the future and what role industrial emissions will play. But Mr. Gates seemed to be doing a public service in demonstrating to his fellow warmists just how empty their domestic virtue signals are if much of the world continues to increase emissions. This is what makes this week's message from Mr. Gates so disappointing. In a new letter, he strangely appears to be presenting the argument against imposing costs on the U.S. as an argument in favor of it. Mr. Gates writes in his annual memo about the journey to zero emissions. Here's what he writes. More than 70 countries have committed to reaching net zero, including big polluters like the U.S. and the European Union. Even if the U.S. and Europe get there, however, we won't have solved the problem. 3/4 of the global population lives in emerging economies like Brazil, China, India, and South Africa. And although historically they played a very small role in causing climate change, they are now responsible for 2/3 of total greenhouse gas emissions. China by itself emits more than 1/4. So solutions can't be dependent on unique conditions in a single country or region. They have to work in all countries, or the temperature will continue to rise. Thinking globally instead of nationally reveals why we can't solve climate change simply by using less energy. Low and middle-income countries are building aggressively to achieve the standard of living their people aspire to, and they should be. Many countries in Europe and in North America filled the atmosphere with carbon to achieve prosperity, and it is both unrealistic and unfair to expect everyone else to forgo a more comfortable life because that carbon turned out to be the change of the climate. So that's what Gates wrote. So it's true that it's unreasonable and futile to ask the major emitters to stop developing. It's true that without their participation, emissions will not be meaningfully reduced. Therefore, it's unreasonable to demand that Americans with low incomes, middle incomes, or even high incomes fund such reductions. Yet Mr. Gates proceeds anyway to celebrate a more ambitious role for government in developing green technologies. This suggests he doesn't have a lot of confidence in those technologies, but there's an easy way for Mr. Gates to demonstrate his conviction. Instead of asking for more government help, Mr. Gates should go all in. There are clearly a lot of assets in the portfolio he could liquidate to fund his green vision. His main investment vehicle often holds large stakes in railroads and auto dealerships, but there's perhaps one investment that would make for an especially powerful symbolic sell-off. The Journal's Benjamin Katz of the Wall Street Journal reported in February of 2021 the following: Bill Gates is doubling down on private jet travel as the niche industry recovers more quickly amid the coronavirus pandemic than the wider commercial aviation market. The billionaire's Cascade Investment LLC agreed to team up with Blackstone Group and private equity firm Global Infrastructure Partners in a $4.7 billion deal for Signature Aviation PLC. The deal would boost Cascade's stake in the world's largest operator of private jet bases to 30% from a previous 19%. So again, Bill Gates' Cascade Investment, that's his company, is teamed up with Blackstone Group, another woke, massive corporation, and the private equity firm Global Infrastructure Partners in a $4.7 billion deal for Signature Aviation, which would increase across the globe private jet bases so that the woke get to fly on private jets in private fancy schmancy airports to avoid the commercial airports and to avoid scrutiny, while telling you you ought not fly, you ought not drive a car, at least not a combustible engine car, and you ought not do a whole lot of anything because you're causing and your very existence is basically contributing to climate change while they're living a life of luxury. So the author here of this opinion piece, James Freeman, is like, wait a minute, Bill Gates, he's investing in all the wrong things with his own money while telling the government to invest your tax money and forcing you to live a completely and utterly different life. So he lied on the one hand when he said, well, the world can never get to where it needs to get to because no one's cooperating, and then came right back and said, yeah, but the U.S. government needs to do a lot more, and it needs to basically tell everybody how they should live their lives because it is climate control. So Bloomberg, this is James Freeman, continuing and finishing the article. It's only one sentence left. Bloomberg estimates Mr. Gates' net worth is $108 billion. Shouldn't at least 107 of those billions be invested in unprofitable climate ventures before the middle-class taxpayers of the United States are asked for another nickel? And that is his thesis here, that Mr. Gates isn't spending enough. So his thesis is Gates is worth $108 billion. Shouldn't he spend $107 billion of his own money on the climate ventures, all these climate, change ventures, all of which are unprofitable, before asking the middle class of the United States to pay massive more taxes and make many more sacrifices? Why doesn't he sacrifice his own money? Why doesn't he take his money out of Signature Aviation, which is building a whole bunch of private jet bases across the planet so that he and his friends can go to all the private airports across the country, and no one really knows what they're doing because you never actually ever see them, because they are the shadow important people saving the climate, saving it while they're destroying it, by the way. Just remarkable. And I sure wish I read this article to you. I read this opinion piece of James Freeman from the Wall Street Journal to you because I want you to understand it is so important, podcast listeners, to fight the left when they virtue signal to you about how you need to dramatically change the way you live and that you are a bad person because you dare to question the true motives of the climate change crowd. Because if the climate change crowd were really legitimate, if they truly were legit, they would give up all of the things that they're asking you to give up. And at the same time, they would use their own money to invest and put at risk for solutions. But they don't do that. They use government money. They use your tax money. You get to fly Southwest. They get to fly private jets in private airports. You get to wait in line and go through the TSA. They don't have to go through that stuff. They just get to, they park in their private hangar or right outside of it, and they walk right onto their jet and they take off. And then they go to another private airport, so they bypass all that stuff. Yet they're asking you to live your life completely differently. They want, Chris here, our producer, mentioned to me the other day that in his new apartment that he has a thermostat on the wall that is controlled by the electric company, effectively.
Well, it automatically changes the temperature. Like, I don't think it's necessarily controlled by it might be, but it automatically changes the temperature without being able to control it yourself.
So this is okay. So this is something that the power company can control with smart meters and smart thermostats and or the landlord, right? So what's interesting, and I'm bringing this up, because do you think for 1 minute, even 1 minute, that the world's elites like Bill Gates, in any way, shape, or form, are sacrificing their comfort and climate inside their own homes? Of course not. Of course not. But they want you to. And there is legislation in many blue states across the country, ladies and gentlemen, because I've seen it, that requires you to have a smart meter and requires you to have a smart thermostat solely for the purpose of having the electric company be able to turn up or turn down your thermostat to save electricity. And why does that matter? Well, it matters because I thought it was your house. I thought it was you're paying for the electricity. Why do they have the right to do that? No, by the way, if you already have solar panels on your house and you're creating your own electricity, why in the heck do they get to tell you how warm or how cold you get to be? Because climate control is really about climate control. It's that simple. And Bill Gates isn't spending enough of his own money. He's not spending enough of his own money because he would never dare live the way you and I live. And it's not because he's a rich guy. It's because he wants to use his power to amass even more wealth and more power. And he thinks that he has some sort of answer. And if he did, he would put all his money in it anyway. And that's it from Mark and the Millennials. That's the last word. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Getter, True Social, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.